are trails all around this pond, and there are other trails that lead to those trails. There's a vast network of trails which I've been exploring for years and still have not seen all the trails. And here's one I came across because I found a map that the town had that showed that there was a trail here. Well, I came across this spot and saw that this is perhaps where the trail had come out, so I decided to clear it, but I had no tools. And this has happened to me before when I have no tools and just my hands. And I looked at it and said, there's no way I can do this, but what I said to myself and what I've said before is try, even if you think you can't do it. And in almost every case of these places, these impasses, I've been successful. So I use that sort of as a metaphor way in life. Don't look at a task and assume you can't do it. You might as well try. My name is Sam Raymond. I was born in Connecticut, New Britain, Connecticut, and lived in Berlin after that. Yeah, some of these old houses are the same as they were. So the early days, things were different, certainly, than they are now. We didn't have high-powered engines in our automobiles, or just Model A Fords, you know, that chugged along. And there were plenty of horse-drawn carriages around. We even had some deliveries made by horse-drawn carriages. There's another porch down there, and he brought the milk, and it was, you know, horse-drawn carriage. And in the wintertime, the milk would freeze, and it would squirt up, and then be up like that above, right? So we had actually horses. Horse shit on the streets, not paved like this. So here's the main house, 203. At that time it was number 8, but somehow things got switched around. Now it's 203. My mother was from Canaan, Connecticut. She eventually lived in New Haven, and that is where she met Horace Raymond, whom she eventually married. Horace Raymond was born in Newburyport, Massachusetts, worked at the Stanley Works in New Britain, Connecticut, and he was quite an inventor and a designer. He designed a lot of hardware for Stanley Works, and then he did a sort of a side thing in our house, our little house on Hudson Street in Berlin. Before we lived in this house, this White House, we lived in that house, right there, that house with the chimney, yeah, the little gray one. And that's what we called the bungalow. And that is the house where the magic door was invented. The magic door. Ladies first. This is a door that opens up when you walk towards it by some mysterious force. Thank you, Daddy. And it was triggered by what was known as the magic eye. And now the magic eye is known as a photocell. And the magic door was, of course, not really magic. It was just plain engineering, but to the public it was magic. Stanley Works went into the manufacturing of these doors, and of course they spread to all over the world. Dad was always inventing all these little gadgets. Most of them didn't work out or so on, but some of them did. And he started a company called Raymond Engineering, and this company grew and grew and grew. He was a good boss and a good businessman, and very loved by his employees. and Mother worked there also. All of us 4 children worked at Raymond Engineering at some time. In the family, there were 4 of us. Jean, the oldest, the firstborn. Then it was Sam Raymond, that's me. Then along came Richard Raymond, also known as Dick Raymond. Then there's George, who became the president of Raymond Engineering and did great things with the company. So my bedroom was in that corner up there. And if we go over here, we can see the window that I looked out from my bunk. It wasn't really a standard bed, but it was built into the wall between the chimney and this other wall. And the window was right abutting my bed, and I really liked that. I could have my head on the pillow and just look out over fields on to New Britain. And at night, of course, it was lights, and that's where I would see at least once a week a fire.
My mama done told me when I was a knee pants, my mama done told me, son.
And there was also a railroad that went right by through New Britain and through Berlin and on. And I could hear the whistles of the trains, different than the diesel horns that they have now. But these whistles were sort of mournful. Ooh.
Now the trains are falling, hear the train a calling, hooey. My mama done told me, hear that lonesome whistle blowing across the trestle, hooey. My mama done told me, a hooey da hooey.
And I was always lusting for adventure. And I used to even plan something in my head, which I had no idea of doing, but of escaping the house and going down and getting on a freight train, and riding the rats, because I knew how to do that, because I'd seen the guys. And then getting off in some city somewhere in America and having an adventure. Of course, I never did it. Well, I did it in other ways, I guess you might say. There's a song that I used to sing, and that's an old song. Now the rains are falling, hear the train a calling, woo-wee, woo-wee-da-woo-wee. I had my little chemistry set in the cellar, and I remember doing all kinds of experiments, and one thing I did, thinking back, that was a bad thing to do, boiling mercury. You know, we put our fingers in it, that's one thing, but of course the mercury vapor is fairly dangerous. It can affect your memory, so I can't remember things very well. You know why?
Let's see, ambidextronitis, delirium sulfurite, 2 milligrams.
The fumes might have got up in the house. I don't know. They didn't know what I was doing down there. I didn't know what I was doing
Just
either. Yeah.
Now, I'm gonna mix these powders together, and if they bubble, dynamite.
I used to make explosive material, so I'd make a little pile of it, different mixtures, and I'd hit it with a hammer and bang, like that.
Don't shake it. One jump, it'll blow up the whole neighborhood. Oh.
So we went around on the 5th of July, and we went to everybody's trash barrel in the back of their house, and we dug through there, and we found night works that didn't go off, you know, these cardboard things, you know. Poured it out and made quite a pile of powder. The other guy lit it with a match.
Run! Those little things can't hurt you.
And I was pretty close with looking at it. Just this huge flash like that. My face, oh my goodness. So I sneaked in the house thinking I was going to get away with letting my mother know what I'd done. I went into the bathroom, and of course she could smell the singed hair. She knew something was going on. Sammy, what are you doing in there? So I opened the door, and there I was, you know, my face was red and so on. Took me to the doctor, and I walked out of the doctor's office with a bandage all over, and just eyes and mouth. So I was delivering papers along here and never put them in a mailbox. Many places didn't even have mailboxes. First job I can remember having was delivering papers.
Morning paper, morning star. Paper, mister?
The New Britain Herald was the main newspaper in Berlin, next town. Certain boys had paper routes. One guy stopped doing the papers and went to sell his paper route, so I bought it. Turned out to be the longest paper route in town. I had my one-speed bike and I had 80 customers. That was quite a load. You know, this is so changed, all this development. Look at that. A lot of farmhouses that were far back from the road, and you didn't just throw the paper in the driveway. You rode up the long path to the farmer's house and put the paper right there. So it was a hardship. It took a long time to do 80 customers out there. So by the time I got home, supper was over and my mother had prepared food for me, which was there, and I had my supper alone. It was part of the punishment for having a paper route. But I enjoyed the paper route. I liked the exercise of it, the adventure of it, perhaps the loneliness of it. I used to sing songs a lot while I was doing the papers, and they were the popular songs of the day. My father was a boatsman, but he wasn't a sailor as far as wind sailing, but he always had a motorboat, and the motorboats were big enough so that the whole family could go, all 6 of us, go down the Connecticut River to get to Long Island Sound, and then we go from there. We even go down the Sound as far as New York City, and once we then went up the Hudson River, and we found that was boring. Somehow the sound was much more interesting.
How deep is it here, Captain Nemo?
Not deep, only about 30 fathoms.
As far as diving, I always wanted to go diving. And I started doing that when I was pretty young. The boat that my father had, the motorboat, we'd go somewhere and anchor. The first thing I'd do is I wanted to swim down to the anchor, see what was down at the bottom of the ocean there. So I'd pull myself down the anchor line. Now, believe it or not, we didn't have masks then. They hadn't been invented. So then I made a aquaplane, which came before water skis. We had, a flat thing, and you had a thing here you held, and this front of the board was tied to the boat. So what I did is I laid down on the board, grabbed the front of it, tipped my body, and found I could go underwater and be towed along under the water, which is pretty neat, trying to see, shipwrecks or whatever it might be. So anyway, the ocean is in my bloodstream. I got salt water in these things. Everybody has salt water in their veins. As a child, my parents seemed to try to develop a thing in me to get interested in travel and exotic things. So they subscribed to a lecture series at the Bushnell Memorial Auditorium in Hartford, Connecticut. The lectures that I heard there were often given by very, very experienced explorers. Particularly I recall men that came in from Africa, and they had pictures of these 100 bearers carrying these bundles of supplies on their heads. I recall a talk by Auguste Piccard, who was the world's greatest balloonist at that time, and he went higher than any person had ever gone in a balloon. I recall very vividly another lecturer, and that was Harold Edgerton of MIT. He was the world's expert in the development of and use of high-speed photography using electronic flash.
Here we go.
He had pictures of bullets going into balloons, which then exploded, and milk drops. All kinds of high-speed things, such as kicking footballs and hitting baseballs and so on. Little did I know that in later life he would be a very, very important person in my life. So here's the grammar school that I went to for 8 years, starting in 1934. Let's see if we can stand up on here. And this building has just 4 large rooms, and that was it for 8 grades, 2 grades per room, and 1 teacher per room. So there's just 4 teachers for these 8 grades. That's the way it was in them days. That was then from 1934 to 1942. In 1938, my father came to the school and gathered all 4 of us up and put us in the car because a hurricane had started. In those days, there was no warning of hurricanes. It just came. And we didn't get very far. We got about 1 block, and the trees had fallen down all over the street. So we spent the hurricane sitting in the car. During that time, World War II started, and I was in 8th grade at that time. The news happened on Sunday, so Monday morning we came to school, and Miss McGee, who was not only our teacher but the principal of the Worthington School, told us that this is ridiculous. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor. That this will be over in a week. That's what she told us. She was wrong, I think. She was wrong.
There'll be a hot time in the town of Berlin when the lads go marching in.
This war does not and must not stop for one single instant. Our fighting men know that. Now, it is your turn.
When our fighting boys begin.
When the war started, we really listened to the radio, and we waited each week to get Life magazine, which is where we got our news and images. I would say Life magazine was the television of that day.
They're gonna take a hike through Hitler's Reich and change that heart. What you know, Joe, there'll be a hot time.
So eventually I graduated from Worthington Grammar School and entered high school. Very different situation. The class I remember particularly is the physics class, since I liked science and engineering. But on the final examination, there was a problem there, and I, according to them, got it wrong, and everybody else got it right. But I insisted that I was right. I brought in equipment, and I proved that I was right, absolutely right. The professor was rather embarrassed. I mean, how could he say I was wrong when there's the proof right there? So that was a victory that I had that made me feel pretty proud. After 3 years of high school, my parents decided that I needed a little touching up, and they sent me off to Dean Academy, where my father had gone, and it was good. I enjoyed Dean Academy. One thing that happened at Dean Academy is I met John McNally, who played the piano even though he was almost blind. He was really a good piano player. So we used to go around the ethnic clubs around that countryside and play jazz there. Oh, I can't give you anything but love. That's the only thing I've plenty of. As far as my musical background back in those days, my mother used to sing songs to us of her era. With someone like you, a pal, so good and true, I'd like to leave it all behind. Important part of it was my father. My father was an inventor, very good inventor. And on the other hand, the other side of his brain, he was an artist and he was a musician. We had a baby grand in our home there in Berlin, Connecticut. And he would entertain us by playing various songs. He was pretty good. He perhaps got his musical talent from his mother, who was a concert pianist. So there was definitely a musical thread through our ancestry. Somewhere out in the west, and let the rest of the world go by. My parents thought I should study a musical instrument, and turned out to be a clarinet. I guess that's what I picked. I took lessons from a teacher with the Berlin school system who came to our Worthington grammar school. It really wasn't inspiring, and I knew what I really wanted to do was play jazz. Benny Goodman was my hero, so I bought this little sheet music thing with Benny Goodman's licks, and I practiced these little licks. But the thing about it was that there was no feeling to it because I had no background for it. It was just play these notes and you'll be like Benny Goodman. Well, it didn't work out that way, of course. Now one day, Nutsi Nasiro, who had taken up the trumpet, was sitting in the room with me when the teacher came in, and just before that, he and I were making some jazz. And this teacher said, "Don't play that kind of music, that will ruin your lip," whatever that meant. But we ignored him. Things didn't really happen with me in jazz until I got to my senior year of high school, which was at Dean Academy. John McNally got me interested in talking with him about music and so on, and playing my clarinet. So much so that when we were in class and he sat on my left, I'd write him a note. What are the chords to Talk of the Town? And he'd quickly write out the chords to Talk of the Town and give them back to me. And of course, when the day was over, I went straight to a piano. Then what happened is I got playing my clarinet with John, jamming after school. And then he introduced me to some friends of his that played other instruments. So we'd go down to these ethnic clubs and drop in and start playing for them, and they loved it. We didn't get paid and so on, but got free beer. Do that, and then we'd go from the Italian club over to the Polish club and so on, and we had a great fun doing that.
Give me a thrill, honey, with all your faults. I love you, still have to be you. Wonderful you, had to be you.
Playing Sam.
I can remember one thing in particular. I'll never forget this one, but it happened at night, probably on a Saturday afternoon. We were playing in the home of one of these guys, and it was getting later and it was getting darker, but we were just, the group of us, there were about 5 of us playing our instruments with John on the piano, and it got darker and darker, and eventually it started. We didn't turn any lights, we didn't need any music, sheet music, we were just jamming, and it was wonderful in the dark, you know, just making this great music. And it was just one of those times, one of those special times. So I graduated from Dean Academy, and soon thereafter I discovered that my father had decided that I'm going to MIT. One of the things that surprised me when I got there that I didn't know was there is there was a magic door on the main entrance. of MIT on Massachusetts Avenue. Thank you, Daddy. I walked up to it, and it opened, and as I walked through, I said, "Thank you, Daddy." And I still do that whenever I go through that door. This is room 10250, the most famous lecture hall at MIT. They had some excellent lecturers. There was one guy, I forget his name, he was about my height, and he had so much enthusiasm, he would run from one end of the blackboards there, back and forth, making notes, talking to people and so on. He was really dynamic. Terrific physics professor. Soon after I started at MIT, I decided to get into some athletic activity. I had problems in some athletics because of my body size, 121 pounds. But wrestling, it turned out, is something that you wrestle against somebody your own weight. I made the team and became the wrestler for the lightest weight. So after a season of wrestling that fall, I was in a bar in Connecticut, and this guy who was quite a bit bigger than I sort of attacked me for some reason, I don't know why. I grabbed him, and I used my wrestling techniques. I knew how to take people down. I grabbed their ankle and lift it up and all this stuff. This guy was bigger than I, but I made him say uncle, so to speak. I got him down on the floor and so on, and I beat him. Along came summer. My father arranged for a job for me with the president of Fuller Brush Company, who had a big yacht, and that I would be one of the boys that took care of the yacht for him and so on. But I decided I didn't want that. I wanted some other earthy adventure and so on. So I decided to hitchhike around America. Found all kinds of adventures, all right. All kinds of strange places like the Grand Canyon, washing dishes with a railroad bum and so on. A king of the road. And I ran out of money. Came up out of the canyon, all worn out, hungry, tired. And I met one of those guys and told him I needed a job and a place to sleep. He said, well, just go in that car over there, just sleep in that boxcar over there. That's what he's going to do. Next summer, I went into the Merchant Marine on an old Liberty ship, I recall. We were supposed to go to Puerto Rico, but instead we went to Port Sulphur, Louisiana, and picked up this horrible cargo of dust. And the first night, they pulled me up the mast to unfurl the flag because I was the smallest, and it was right there in the path of the fumes from the engine, trying to breathe up there, get me down, but they spoke Spanish, said, arriba, arriba, which means up, and I shouted down, avanda, avanda, which means down. I knew that word. There were all kinds of colorful characters on that ship. One of my roommates was a pretty big guy, and one night I was at the stern of the ship, and he came along and he's talking to me, and he said, you know, I could kill you right now, and nobody would know it. Just take you and throw you over the side. I'm Popeye the Sailor Man. All kinds of weird things happened on that trip. While at MIT, I signed up for the ROTC program. The last two summers, I went off to Fort Belvoir, Virginia for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers training program, and that was quite interesting. We had lessons in how to blow up things and so on. I got in the ROTC band. I played the baritone saxophone in the ROTC band. Soon after that, I got activated to go to Korea. So they ordered me to report to this induction center in Manhattan. I went down to that, And they said, you gotta have a physical. They did a physical. They found sugar in my urine. I told them that that's renal glycosuria, and they shook their heads and said no. So they kicked me out, which is very strange after 4 years of training, knowing that I had this thing. And so I didn't go to Korea. After graduating from MIT, I got talking to Artie Powers, a friend of mine, and we decided, why don't we go on a spree? Well, let's go have some fun. Let's go to Europe. And neither of us had been to Europe. It was arranged that we'd go on a troop ship. These troop ships were going back and forth across the Atlantic, bringing our soldiers home, but they went to Europe empty. So we got on this troop ship and went to Netherlands and went from there, bought some motorcycles in London, and then we go to the mainland of Europe.
We were driving around in just khaki pants and no shirts, and we both had been on wrestling teams, so our muscles were rippling, which we thought the women would find attractive. But looking like two bums, I don't think they really found us particularly attractive at all. Paris was wonderful. We were going to be there 3 or 4 days, and as I recall, we stayed 11. We climbed in the Notre Dame Cathedral. You remember we went all the way up, we climbed out of the windows, and the top of it where those animals were, gargoyles. We climbed out of the windows and stood next to the gargoyles. We did some crazy things. If the police had seen us, they would have said, these guys got to be crazy. But of course we were.
And of course, we went up the Eiffel Tower. We took some photographs there. I had one looking straight down.
We went through northern and north-central Italy. So as we're going along, my chain broke on my motorcycle, and I had to have the bike repaired. It was going to cost like 50 cents American, but we didn't have any lira. So Sam said, let's get the ukulele out.
Somebody stole my gal. Somebody stole my pal. Somebody came and took her away.
So we start going, somebody stole my gal. And then the lira start floating out of the windows. And I took his derby and went around catching it.
Right.
You remember?
Yeah.
I was catching
and
the
we
liras.
we had wine with dinner that night.
Yeah.
Broken-hearted lonesome pal.
There's so many funny stories, and you know, you're talking, how many, 58 years later, so we don't remember everything that happened. But it's a wonderful trip, and I couldn't have been with a greater guy. And just to see each other after all these years is fun, and brings back a lot of happy memories.
Okay, buddy. After getting back from Europe, went the usual way, went to work for my father at Raymond Engineering. Didn't last too long. I just got itchy feet, shall we say. And I thought, gee, I'd like to get a job overseas. I could work overseas. So I went down to New York, knocking on doors, so to speak, answering ads, trying to get a job in Europe. But somehow I ended up getting a job with an oil company in Calcutta, India. That was available, and other jobs were not available. So off I went. I wanted to go by ship, so they sent me by ship, first class, which was pretty neat. The ship went from New York to London, and another ship then went to Bombay. I arrived in Bombay on a Friday afternoon. I was met by an official from Caltex India Limited. And this fellow showed me to my hotel and said, see you Monday morning. Well, as soon as he was gone, I hit the road and I walked almost all night long, just wandering. It was just so exotic. Stepping over people sleeping on the sidewalk, strange music, people in alleyways. I did this all weekend, and I saw the official of the company on Monday morning, and when I told him where I'd been, he shook his head. He said, I'd never been there, I never would go there. They arranged for a train for me to take from Bombay to Calcutta. And that was quite an experience, just seeing India from the west side to the east side. So I went to the office in Calcutta, and I was put into a training program to be a lubrication engineer. And there was a very nice hotel in the center of Calcutta, which is the Grand Hotel. That was the big one of that era. They had a grand piano in there, and I occasionally went in there and played it. And one time, my friend that played the bass brought his bass in, and we did a little duet, and it was really something. I got a kick out of doing that. I'm saving my love for you. Then I met a fellow in a bar, and he turned out to be the port diver for Calcutta in the Hooghly River, which is a branch of the Ganges River. And he saw that I was really interested in diving, and he said, well, why don't you come down to the dock tomorrow, and we'll see what we can do, get you underwater. Really? Wow. So I took him up on that, and I appeared there, went down there in my motorcycle, and there he was, and there were the pumps and so on, and he started putting me into a big rubber suit, and then put a big metal helmet on my head and so on, and a window here, and hoses there, and the pump was pumped by hand. He had these two young men that would go like this, and you depend on them for your life, for your air. Got in the water, down I went, and there was no telephone. Well, the telephone was the rope. If you pull once, that means I'm okay. If you just kept pulling like that, that means get me up out of here, right? As soon as I got down about 6 feet, all light went away. The river was so heavy with silt that there was really no light down there. There I was on the bottom, learning how to dive by myself, just learned. And that was my first experience breathing underwater. When I was living in Calcutta, occasionally got a week off, and I'd go up to the Himalayas, up to Darjeeling in this very small gauge railroad it's a famous train now these days, one of the most famous offbeat trains in the world. This is a Darjeeling train. So it so happened that while I lived in Calcutta, Mount Everest was climbed by Hillary and Tenzing. Just so happened that I went up to Darjeeling shortly after that, and there was Tenzing. I met him and had my picture taken with him, which appeared in the New Britain, Connecticut Herald. My mother put it in there. So I went hiking in the Himalayas towards Mount Kinchenjunga, and I went with two Sherpas that I got from Tenzing, the real guys. So we went towards Mount Kinchenjunga, third highest mountain in the world, and it was really something you could see where the snow was being blown off the top of the mountain, a hurricane up there. So we didn't go up, of course, didn't even get to it. We just had a nice week of hiking in that area. Been many, many, many years since I've come here. While I was working in Calcutta, I got the unfortunate news that my father had died, which was something that was known that would be happening because he had emphysema, deadly disease from cigarette smoking. This is it. Horace H. Raymond, 1897 born, died in 1954. His life best. Things you say and do, they just thrill me through and through. I'm getting sentimental over you. I corresponded with my mother and so on, and really decided that I better go home. But I didn't plan to go home immediately. And I flew on to to Karachi, Pakistan. I went to capital cities of the Middle East. I loved the bazaars where they had these huge copper kettles for sale and all kinds of wonderful antique-looking things, you know. And then eventually I got to Lebanon. Then I looked around and I thought, where shall I go now? Okay, I think I'll go to Egypt. How will I get there? Well, I found out there's a cheap way to get there, and that's called deck passage, where you slept on the deck. And I had a good time. There were a bunch of young German people, and I was singing songs with them and so on. And at one point I looked into this cabin, which was sort of the library, and people were sitting in there. And it looked awfully boring. People were just sitting there reading their newspapers. We were out on the deck singing these songs in the moonlight, and it was beautiful, nice breeze. So we had a much better place to be than they had at their great expense. That got me to Egypt. So I decided to go up the Nile by train. And up the Nile was Karnak, an ancient city with these terrific ancient columns. It was a really historic place to be. There's a lot of historic stuff there. It was a thrill to be there. So from there, I went to Greece, and I got another deck passage over to Italy. I bought a motor scooter. So I took the motor scooter and I rode it all the way up to Sweden. It was September, riding in the rain. I loved it when I stopped and I'd go to some pub and get some good German food, and they almost always had rooms upstairs, very inexpensive. And I got a ship back, and the name of the ship was the United States. Back from Europe and back to Raymond Engineering again, and that's what I did. Went off skiing. It was the usual thing to do in the wintertime, and I was up at Bromley ski area, and I asked this woman down the table to pass me the ketchup. She did, and her name turned out to be Heidi Bitsy. I got to know her a little bit, so on, and then started dating her and married her. And we moved out to the West Coast. She liked to travel, and so did I, so we went to Tacoma. We got a house that was right on the beach in a place called Dash Point. Swimming out there was terrific, and also the fishing was right off the dock. So it was a pretty nice, adventurous place to live. Where I worked was the Weyerhaeuser Timber Company, which is in the downtown area of Tacoma. So we stayed there for, I guess, a couple of years. Eric was born there, and we took him boating and other things. Got the wanderlust again, and decided to try Southern California. Worked for Hughes Aircraft Company, a gigantic aerospace company, and that was quite different than Weyerhaeuser. I was in charge of the guidance unit for one of their air-to-air missiles. We lived near the ocean there. And eventually, Vaughn Raymond was born. So we had 2 sons. Family was growing.
I'm gonna sit right down and write myself a letter.
That's when I sat myself down and said, I better settle down into something that I really like. So what is my dream job? My dream job would be to work for Harold Edgerton at MIT. So got in the car and started driving east, and that was an adventure in itself, of course, across the southern part of the United States and the coast, East Coast, and went to Cambridge and went and saw Doc Edgerton on a Saturday.
I mean, you might recognize it. So this is all different. Do you remember all the...
Well, this looks pretty.
It's good.
So I walked in here to Doc and I said, what do I want to do? I could get a job and work for you. He said, well, here's a job. Mount this camera on this housing, on this framework over here. Mm-hmm. This is one of these big, heavy stainless steel things, right? So I mounted that on there and I put the flash on there, but it slipped and the light cover cracked. Mm-hmm. Oh, gee, I felt terrible.
That's right.
He said, "Don't worry about that, Sam. We get those free."
Yeah.
right, which is a lie, but that's all right.
But he wanted you to feel good.
That's right. He could have bawled me out, but he
That's right.
certainly
Well,
didn't do that. He said, "What are you doing tomorrow?"
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "You want to come down Woods Hole? We're going to test this camera, see how it works out. You'd like to come with us?"
Sure.
I said, "Oh, yeah." So I showed up here the next day. We went down there. We tested the camera. There are many oceanographic laboratories in the world, but I have read that this is the largest of all of them. They cover the world. They don't just look around the Atlantic. They go to the Pacific, the Indian Ocean. They go the world oceans. No ships in right now. No ships. Came back here, and then I brought up the subject of a job again.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, why don't you come down to see EG&G tomorrow?" So I went over there and I talked to this guy. They eventually told me that there was no job there for me.
Oh,
so I
okay.
came here and told Doc there's no job. And he said, "Well, try again tomorrow." So I tried the next day and got the job, just like that.
Funny, they had a job for it all of a
It's
sudden.
good for telephones, right?
I was going to say, presumably Edgerton picked up the
There's
phone
no
and he
question
said,
about it. No question. He told them.
"You're going to hire Raymond."
That's right. I got this job at EG&G. We, by the way, were living in Watertown, Mass. And it was while we were living there that Nixie was born. A year and a half later, Monica was born. In the meantime, I was off taking cruises for Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and the U.S. Navy, where I was the expert on these cameras that Doc Edgerton had developed. And that was quite an adventure off on these Hui ships. I was on the Calypso at one point.
Oh.
That was with Doc Edgerton. He took me down to New York to a show, and Cousteau was there. When we went aboard the Calypso. During all this, I was doing things on the weekend there in Rutland Street, in a cellar that was making underwater camera housings for Life magazine and other contacts. And then I got this idea to make an underwater Polaroid camera. Polaroid cameras were a new exciting thing in the day. So thought about how would I make that work underwater. Well, I was able to do that. Acrylic box, a window in the front to look out, and some cranks and so on, so that you could take pictures underwater, develop them underwater, and see them underwater. This is a first. Doc was interested in it. He contacted Edward Land, the head of Polaroid Corporation, who then made sure I had all the cameras I needed. Then they had a show, a camera show, a photographic show in Philadelphia. Got to the show and they had already set up a tank for me to dive in. It was a steel tank, about 3 feet, 4 feet in diameter. And it had a big window so that I could see the audience out there and the audience could see me. I'd take their picture, show it to them. It was a good demo. It was quite a crowd gathered around there. And, it was also written up in Popular Science magazine. EG&G offered me a job as the head of the new underwater camera department. It was a desk job, and I was interested in going to sea and doing engineering and so on. So I didn't take that job. Heidi and I decided, let's get into the country. Let's move down to Cape Cod. So I quit the job, and Heidi found this farmhouse in North Falmouth, which had a barn, which was great place to put the shop, and that became the Benthos company. Oh, there's the Benthosaurus! Yay! Benthos' name came from Doc Edgerton, really, because he developed cameras that were used in the Mediterranean that took the first pictures of a certain fish that was only known to be caught in midwaters, and found that fish on the ocean floor standing on a tripod of its pectoral fins and its tail fin. and its name was Benthos, Benthos meaning deep, and it was a fish that lived down only at depths, and it lived on the bottom. And I thought, gee, why don't I name the company Benthos? And that was a good pick. And it scientifically means something. The scientists know very well what that means. It's deep. The main customer was Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution.
Right.
And practically the day after we moved in, I got a phone call from a scientist down there wanting me to build something for him. And I looked at what he had, and he wanted me to make 5 of those. I said, no, I won't make 5 of those, but I'll make something better. And he said, well, let's see what you got. So a few days later, I came down with a much improved device, and he ended up buying 5 of them. And then he told me about other customers there might be, and we sold overall about 300 of those things.
What was that device?
It's called a time depth recorder. It's a thing that is put onto the plankton net that's towed through the ocean.
The TDR you showed me the other
TDR,
day?
that's right, time depth recorder. And that led to other products. Every product branched out to some other products, which is very nice. It grew like this, like here's the TDR and here these other things that came out of that.
It was grown by word of mouth from one scientist to another.
Yeah, that's right. So what happened is we had the time depth recorder, and it's what it could do within the depth telemetering pinger, which was so much better. And then somebody else wanted a temperature telemetering pinger to work in the Persian Gulf with the hot spots, or those hot vents, so that they could locate these hot vents using the temperature telemetering pinger. That worked out. And then we made just plain pingers. Then we made acoustic returning pingers, so you'd send a signal out to the pinger, it would send it back, and the length of time it took tells you the range. You put out 3 of those around your ship, and you can tell exactly where you are relative to those 3 responding pingers. So we're in the acoustic navigation business. We started off with a little time depth recorder. What did it become? Acoustic navigation path that it led there.
How many employees?
Well, first it was 1, and that was me. And then what happened is there was a guy that delivered the parts from the machine shop. And then one day he came in and he said, well, this is the last time you'll see me because I just lost my job. So I said, well, why don't you come here tomorrow and make the parts right here. So that was great, and that saved money, and it was very good. He was my first employee, Jack Morris, a very, very good guy. And then he knew another guy who was good, and he brought him in, and they brought, things started to build. So we put a tank in there, a pickle barrel is called, and we needed that to test for things for flotation, all kinds of things that moved around in the water and so on. Okay, what we're seeing is a base that was made for the so-called pickle barrel, which of course is a big barrel of water, and it was our tiny bit of ocean simulation so that we could test the buoyancy of things and propulsion and so on. We didn't want to sell things that had never even been in the water. Well, this is a trip down memory lane for me. Think of it, it's like 40 years since I've been here.
Yeah.
That's right. And then we needed a pressure vessel. You've got to test this stuff. You can't just put it together and ship it out to the customer because it may break or leak or what have you. So we were able to get a 16-inch naval gun shell from naval scrap. And other people had made pressure vessels out of these shells, these projectiles. After we built the one and started using it here, I thought, well, what about these other companies all around the country that are building stuff for deep ocean? They don't have a pressure vessel. So I was able to arrange to get 100 of these shells, and we put them in the yard back there, standing up like this. That was quite something in this residential neighborhood. This was not zoned for industry. It was zoned for agriculture. And sometimes I say, well, that's why it grew.
Yeah.
Agriculture, right? Anyway, so we had those shells out there, and we sent them off to a big machine shop that could machine things that big and heavy. And we sold a lot of those. And they did a lot of people a lot of good.
Now over there you'll see those round,
Oh yeah,
those
from
round
those.
spots. That's something you stored there that made those round spots.
They are the things I was just telling them about.
Those are the shells.
Those are the shells.
Yep.
The bullets, 16-inch diameter bullets.
Yeah,
Yep.
they're 16.
There they are. Yep.
How interesting.
Always been this way.
Yeah, permanent
Doesn't
mark.
ever change. See them? See them behind you, all around you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, look at them all.
Yeah.
Yeah, we got about 100 of those at one time. We are going up to what was the office. This was a machine shop down on that level. And up here is where my desk was, down at that end. Yeah, my desk was down there. We didn't have these beds at that time. No bureaus, no radios. Radios were banned.
Yeah, I heard a rumor, Sam, that they actually had a warning system about when you came so they could turn their radios off.
What
Is
it
that
is?
true?
Well, I didn't know this until the retirement party.
Oh, and they told?
Long time, yeah, and what it was is the electronic guys were in there, and I didn't allow radios.
Yeah.
So they had they had radios, and they put a switch on the door. So as soon as you opened the door, turned off the radio.
Off.
Yeah. And they consider this to be a real victory over me. That's the way it was.
And it was because you didn't know at the time. Did
I
you?
didn't know just as well.
Yeah.
I thought it would slow down production or something. This is the boomerang corer here.
Over here in the corner?
Right here. It's a boomerang corer. Now I hope it's got its spheres in it. There should be, yeah, it has. See a glass ball in there. There's another glass ball up here. A series of scientists came to us to build things for them. And one day I had a call from Hui to see Dr. Vaughn Bowen down there, who was interested in corer that you could throw over the side of a ship. It would go down and get a sample and bring it back up again. And they had a way to do that, but it was really, really cumbersome, crude. Gasoline floats and concrete weights and so on. And it came back from a cruise using those, and in my inbox, just by great luck, was a brochure from Corning Glass Company where they had come out with a glass float that could go down to great depths. And so I thought that's the way to go instead of gasoline. However, I wanted to put a flash inside the glass ball. I asked Corning, could you make one that, you know, can go like this? No, we don't have that. It's just fused ones. Okay, well, send me a couple of hemispheres, just molded. So I worked out a way to make them flat here and bevel them and so on, put them together, and put the electronic flash inside with a switch on the outside. So therefore, we were successful in making not just flotation things, but also a housing for instruments. All kinds of things could now be put inside these spheres, and that swept the world. Benthos spheres. Look at this. Look at all these spheres, Vaughn. But all of these are just buoyancy. But look at how many there are.
Yes.
Yeah. Thousands and thousands of those things have been built and are being built. So it was the old story of one thing leading to another, doing something, and then something else will happen. Stainless steel bolts. We got a lot of cars here at the diner today, but it looks like there's one parking space left right here for us. There's Carl. This is Carl's and my diner. Here we are, Carl. Yep, we meet again. Thank you, Carl. Yeah. Yeah, Carl, we've had hundreds of meals here, no question.
I sure have.
Right. Carl.
I know it.
How you doing, buddy?
Doing good.
Old friends here.
Yep. That's
friends
very
for
true. Yep.
friends for life.
That's right.
Absolutely, Carl. Okay, this is the Silver Lounge. I first found this place by hiking out through the woods that we were just in. I didn't know it was here. We were in the house. I came through the woods and there's this restaurant right here. And it turned out to be a lucky find because this became a big part of me with the music and so on, and a place to entertain.
So I found that there were some interesting jazz musicians here. A little group came together, the four of us, a bass player, a drummer, a piano player, and me on my clarinet. Our venue was the Silver Lounge, and our followers were the people at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We let the word out that we were going to play at the Silver Lounge. So notices went up all over Hui, and a lot of people came. That was a lot of fun. We got free beer, that was all we got. But I can recall leaving the Silver Lounge after playing just with a feeling of euphoria. It's not necessarily the beer, but just to be making that music that the four of us all loved so much.
Well, the business was growing, and realized that the barn was not a place for it to really expand, and I started thinking about a new building, build a new building. So made the drawings and we got a building built. So it was a building in North Falmouth, not far from the house. It's more than just a plain building, because in the middle of it there is a tank, 20 foot square, 20 foot deep, 50,000 gallon tank. You've heard about the pickle barrel over there. Well, this big tank in there took the place of that pickle barrel, which wasn't, of course, that big. And there's the old pool. There we are. Still has this grid on it from the photographic days.
Yeah, people still ask about that.
What's the grid for? Yeah, right.
What the grid's for.
This is the first part of the building they built was this pool. Had to.
Oh,
how would you build it afterwards?
Yeah, that's right.
But it was huge. Big ditch. Big hole, I should say.
Explain
that tower is symbolic. You know, what that is a copy of the tower that's on one of the oceanographic ships at Hui. It's on the Atlantis II. So I wanted to make one of those and have it put up here. So I got the drawings from the company that built the Atlantis ship, including drawings of this tower, and I got that tower made. And the tower turned out to be more than a decoration. It's been used for various functions, such as draining the hydrophones, arrays, to get the oil to flow properly and so on. So it's nice to have a use for it besides just amusement. Anyway, I'll go up a couple of steps here. There we go. It's been a long time since I've been up here. First time in decades since I've been up here. Here we are on the roof of Benthos. Ta-da. Looks like it needs a paint job on. Hi. Hi. I'm fine, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, still making hydrophones. Look who's here. Yay, Alan Douglas. Hi. How are you, Alan?
Good.
Hey, good to see you. You're looking fine. How old are you now?
Me? Just turned 65, actually.
65? My goodness. Yeah, I'm turning 80 pretty soon.
Ah, okay.
Alan goes all the way back to the very beginning of the company. He's the oldest employee here. Oldest employee, well, I didn't. Oh, that's right, Carl.
Of course he doesn't.
Carl.
He had the sense to retire.
Boy, things have changed, my goodness. It looks well organized.
Your office used to be in that corner.
They took off the floor?
When I first got here, yeah.
With the floor up here?
Yep, with the higher.
For the shorty guys?
Yeah, yeah.
So let's just take a quick look in here. Oh boy, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 microwaves. Hey, that's really getting up there. How many employees do we have now?
About 130 employees.
Wow.
Yeah, and it goes up and down a little bit with the hydrophone business, as you know. You know, you get a lot of the hydrophones, you know, an order come in
Right.
for thousands of them, and then it'll go away, and then so about 130 right now.
That's one of the reasons we have tap tone, to try to average things out.
Yeah.
That was the original idea, and I think it works.
Yeah,
right?
it does.
I have often said that the oceanographic business is like the tide of the ocean, and tide goes up and down, and the business goes up and down. So I'm trying to think of some product that we could make that would run along parallel to Benthos and not go up and down with something that's always needed. And I remembered that when I was a kid, my father had invented a thing for finding bad baby food jars inside the cardboard cases for beech nut baby food. What they were doing is ripping the boxes open like this and going in there with a drumstick and hitting the tops of the cans like this and listening to the tone. If they heard a sound like this, that was good. If they heard a sound like that, that was bad. So they challenged my father, can you find a way to find out where these bad ones are without opening the boxes? Well, he knew what to do because of a toy he had made for us, which had a coil of wire with a penny on the top and a capacitor discharged into the coil, and the penny would jump up in the air. So his idea was to put these coils on top of the box like this, and this would tap here like this. So I contacted Beech Nut and Canada here in New York and found that he had supplied them with a machine with 24 magnetic heads, but it was not successful. It was too cumbersome and so on. So then I got the idea of just make one head and just move it around on top of the case, going like this, and if it ever went instead of you knew that was a bad one. So that was a winner. That was a winner. So you didn't have to open up the case unless you knew there was a bad one in there. And this may be one case out of 1,000, but that doesn't matter. They can't afford to have any bad cans going out of there. So we put that on the market with just one head and sold a lot of those. But of course, people then said, well, can't you do this with automation? Okay, we'll do it with automation. And we put 4 heads and so on. And then we did one head. These things eventually were flying by 30 a second, and it would just kick off the bad one. So that swept the world. It really did. Beer industry, automotive industry with oils and stuff, and foods, beverages. It was fun having something nobody else has got, and they all need it. So that was a big success. Well, this is a very important area. People send in stuff that say, can you test this for us? Can you test this for us? And if we can't do it with the existing machines, we come up with a new machine. And I talk as if I was still here. Yay. When I worked at Doc Edgerton's laboratory at MIT, the main thing I worked on was the deep sea cameras. These are 35 millimeter cameras with big lengths of film in them and very strong stainless steel housings. So EG&G had inherited the underwater camera lines from MIT, from Doc Edgerton, and they eventually decided not to manufacture them anymore. And fortunately I heard about this, so I dashed up there and worked out a deal where I could buy the whole camera line, and that was a really good move. Now, along with the camera, hardware and so on, came a package which I would call adventure. And these cameras took me to various places in the world in exotic situations, and including the North Pole, and trips to the Titanic and Loch Ness. Every one of those was an adventure, and it was a lot of fun. The Canadians wanted to get up to the North Pole and study the ocean floor at the North Pole. Now, the North Pole is basically an ocean covered with ice, and the ice moves around. The wind pushes it around. It's tricky. So 3 of us went up there, Emery Christoph, Joe McGinnis, and Sam Raymond. We flew out of Canada. We landed on
a refrozen lead, which was a flat thing when the ice had ripped apart. The water came in and it froze. You got a natural airport made. We landed there and lived in tents for several weeks. And we chopped holes through the ice, lowered the cameras down, and photographed the ocean floor at the North Pole for the first time. There were times when we actually dove under the ice to check up on the cameras and so on, and that was quite an experience. And the temperature was 40 degrees below zero the whole time I was there. We had these thick rubber suits and a rope to the hole where we went in. So again, we're back to pulling the rope signals just like in Calcutta. I loved the way the things looked under the air. It's just so beautiful. It looks straight down. It's absolutely black because it's 12,000 feet deep. You look horizontally and you see jumbled ice, white ice, and the light was coming down through the ice and illuminating the ice underneath. It was really a beautiful scene. And of course, it was strange to have daylight continuously. The sun was over here, and then 12 hours later, it's over there. It's just going around and around. Of course, it wasn't going around. We were going around. Right? Time to go back. Well, I decided that this is a great opportunity here. How many people get to the North Pole and hang out? So I asked the commander of the expedition if I could stay another week and give him a hand. He said, sure. So they sent me out to a satellite camp. They had the main camp and then they had the satellite camps, 2 of them. And I was there for a week with these 2 guys. And they'd been isolated from the whole group for over a month. And soon after I got there, one of the guys took me aside and told me what was wrong with the other guy. And then the other guy took me aside and told me what was wrong with the other guy. Because they needed somebody else to talk to, so I listened to them and I did some cooking and the scientific work and so on. So that was part of the adventure, part of the fun. Another expedition I went on that was very interesting and fun. That was to Loch Ness. We went looking for the monster, and we rigged up a camera with an acoustic trigger on it to try to get a picture of Nessie. I had my clarinet with me, and then one night I put my clarinet into the water and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, trying to charm the monster to come up, but he didn't come up. We had a good time. As Doc Edgerton said when asked about the monster, did we find the monster? I said, well, we didn't, but we certainly had a good time. The Titanic expedition was really fine. The one that I went on was after the Titanic had been discovered. IMAX Corporation decided to do an IMAX movie on Titanic. We joined a Russian ship called the Academic Keldysh. This is an unusual ship. It carries 2 deep ocean submarines. With Emery Christoph in charge of the expedition out of the National Geographic, we took off to the north to the site of the Titanic, which is off Canada, off Newfoundland. We found the Titanic. We put down Benthos transponders around the Titanic, 3 of them, so that we could keep the Keldysh right over the Titanic. And then the subs would go down. Unfortunately, I never got to dive there myself, and not everybody could get down, but the IMAX films were really spectacular. And as a result, James Cameron got interested in making a movie on the Titanic. So he contacted Emery contacted us, and they needed special housing to take the big camera that James Cameron had. So I spent a lot of time designing this window and housing, and it had to be right, and it was right. I went out on some of that expedition, preliminary parts. I got to know Cameron a bit. And Cameron wanted to talk to me about another project, so I met him at his house. And there was a shelf of all these Oscars. He grabbed it, went off the shelf, and handed it to me. And here I am holding my Oscar for 2 minutes. It was funny, this picture, as you can see. Here I am with my Oscar, right, for 2 minutes. Travel. Travel is one of my joys. Love to travel. And the style of travel that I like to have is not staying in big expensive hotels and so on, but instead staying in youth hostels. During my 40s and 50s, I did quite a bit of traveling and would take off without a schedule or without a time that I'll be back by or anything like that, but just feeling that good sense of freedom, of vagabonding. I went to every continent except Antarctica. It was really quite an experience to be in occupied Eastern Europe before the wall came down, of course. You know, these countries were forced into communism and so on, and it was so dreary. I was in Moscow, and that was really quite an experience. Another memorable trip was being in Eastern Europe and getting news that the wall was coming down. It was coming down. So I figured I'd like to be there, so I made the arrangements, took the right train. We got there just about at midnight. People had come from all parts of the world to be a part of this and helping taking down the wall. So I was able to borrow a sledge from somebody and a chisel. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning by that time, and I went like this, clink, 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 and chipped out several pieces of the wall, helping to bring it down, of course, right? Well, I think the most memorable trip that I took was with my daughter Nixie to Tibet, and particularly to an event that we witnessed in Tibet. Tibet was closed to Westerners, we learned, but we also learned how to get into Tibet, and it was by forgery. We paid someone from Hong Kong to sign on our visa. They just write Lhasa on there, and that got us to Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. But it was pretty scary, forged documents. But, well, we took a chance, and we were okay. We flew in and spent a week there. That was wonderful. It was quite something to be in Lhasa and to see the wonders there, the religious buildings and so on. We learned about a funeral that is taking place just about every day, and they are buried, shall we say, buried in the morning. We decided to try to see that. There are mountains to the north. We knew it was somewhere up in those mountains, but we didn't know where, and we didn't speak any Tibetan. Well, we just headed north on foot, and in the distance, eventually we saw fires burning, and we knew we are going to see something that we will never, ever forget. And that was correct. Their burial system is a little different than ours, and it goes into the sky rather than into the ground. And it's called celestial burial, like the stars up there. And it consists of taking the bodies and dismembering them completely, crushing the bones and so on, and then having vultures devour the stuff, and the vultures fly away into the sky. We took pictures and later found out that, at least today, it's absolutely forbidden to take photographs of these procedures. So I have pretty rare pictures. That was one of the greatest adventures I had on all my world travels. Oh, I can't give you anything but love. That's the only thing I've plenty of. 1994 was a big year for me. That's the year that I met my
new wife here, Holly Ballou. A great event happened in Lexington, Massachusetts at the home of Marty Lieberman, where there was a jazz party. Jazz really brought us together. We both loved traditional jazz, and that's why we went there. And we really hit it off. From there on up, it was just nothing but togetherness, stronger and stronger. Well, I'm very fortunate having 4 wonderful children. And running down the list, Eric the first, he's an inventor, he's an engineer, lives quite an adventurous life.
How do you like that, the Dolomite?
And I feel that he probably inherited some of my engineering capabilities because he loves engineering. Vaughn is an artist, he's an actor, and a musician, a video maker, and so on. He has a lot of talent. Who knows what he'll become next? Monica's living in New Hampshire. She is an epidemiologist, and she's been on several expeditions to Africa and Europe to try to help wipe out certain diseases such as polio, which has sprung back into the world. She's also very handy with a hammer and a saw. She built a house in New York State, and she did it basically all herself. So she's got the hands-on attitude, which she might have inherited some of that from me. Dixie Raymond is a person that is very athletic. She's quite a runner. She's very devoted to health, that is exercise and also diet. And she's a professional pediatric nutritionist. She's worked in the hospitals and so on. She loves children, and she has 2 lovely boys with Jim. That is Morgan and Jesse. Hey, Morgan. Hi, here you are, honey. Hi. All right, how you doing? That was crushed by pressure. See? It just really crushed it.
Oh, that
This is also crushed.
It used to be a cup, and it got crushed by pressure.
Right, here are the crushed cups down here.
That was the original, and then it went to that, and then that, and then that, and then that. Is that Jason Jr. or Alvin?
This is Alvin. We're standing up on top of it. Wow.
Is that like gasoline?
That is going to get a lot. No, it's not gasoline, it's oil, black oil. It's going to dump it on itself.
Yeah, the kind of oil they use for engines.
It gets up the top, it's going to go, the oil is going to go all over the place. Watch this. I think. Yes, I'm right. Martin Bowen.
Sets up the assets, and then
He used to work for me.
Ballard had the.
There are probably over 1,000 people that have worked at Benthos. Benthos has been a starting place for a lot of people that have actually gone off and done their own businesses. So, Benthos was sold a few years ago, and I retired. The company now has over 100 people. I feel that the company is in good hands. The products are well made, well known, and distributed around the world. I feel a pride in Benthos. It's a good company, and they're good people doing a good job. Started in the barn with a simple little instrument, and it just almost grew by itself. And the more business we did, the more business we got. And it's going to survive a long time, I feel. No, I've never been up in. Who is it?
Raymond, how you doing?
Okay.
This is Jim Rhoda up here.
Oh, hi, Jim.
And this is his personal assistant, Riley.
We're coming up.
Come on up for a beer.
Hey, great. I'm all for it. Well, look who's here. Hi. I have a lot of friends, a lot of friends. A lot of these came through business.
How about we'll bring you on the Galapagos? It would be perfect.
Great.
You'd like that.
I'm very fortunate because I've had a life that I've really enjoyed, continuing to do so. I'm home again. Okay. Okay. Here I come. Well, it's a saying that you should follow your heart, and that's what I did. I think that's good advice, to do what you really love to do, that you have a passion for, and go along on that path.